Hello, and welcome to another video tutorial. In this video, I will go over creating an AWS API with multiple resources and methods, all which will talk to our existing Lambda functions, which in turn will talk to our DynamoDB. We will also need to update our Angular web application code, which means we will need to rebuild our code again, just like what we did in the beginning of week 3, then redeploy it once again to our AWS S3 bucket. You can simply overwrite the S3 bucket files, or you can delete what's out there currently and then upload new files. Both ways will work. Okay, so I have the Project 1 guide opened, and it's pretty long, but most of the tasks needed here are things that you have done in previous weeks, which are to create an API, then add resources and methods. So let's get started. The instructions are asking us to create a new REST API and call it questions and answers. I'm already at the API gateway in my AWS console, and I'll scroll down to where I find REST API, not REST API private. Then I'll click on the Build button. Under the Create New API section, I'll click on New API. And for the API name, the instructions say to call it Questions and Answers. So I'll type that. Then I'll type a brief description. Then I'll leave the endpoints as regional. Then click on Create API. Now, the goal is to build two resources, one for questions and one for answers. And under each of these resources, we will have multiple methods. And we will also have a sub-resource called ID with its own methods as well. So I'll begin by creating a new resource for questions. I'll click on Actions, then Create Resource. In the resource name field, I'll type questions with a capital Q, which is important because resource names and our code are case sensitive. Then make sure that in the resource path, you also added the small q in questions to be a capital Q. Now this is important, so please don't forget to do this step. Then click on Create Resource. So now we have our first resource created. Make sure that questions is selected, then go to Actions and choose Create Method, then choose Get, and then click on the check mark. From this window, since we want our API to talk to a Lambda function, then we will keep the first option chosen. Then we will check the Lambda proxy integration. And if we hover over the eye icon, then we see that it says that the requests will be proxied to the Lambda function, which is what we want. I will keep my region as US East 1. Then in the Lambda function field, since I want to tie this API get method to the table scan Lambda function, then I'll start by typing the letter T for table scan, and this will appear for me, which are all my existing Lambdas that I created from previous weeks. I'll choose table scan, then I'll click on save. Here we see this dialog box appear saying that you are giving this API permission to invoke this Lambda function, and it shows us which Lambda function it is. And since that's what we want, then I'll click on OK. So that was the get method on the questions resource, which talks to my table scan Lambda function to get all the questions in my questions DynamoDB table. I now need to add two more methods to the questions resource, and this will be the post and put methods, and both will use the upsert question Lambda function that we created last week. So I'll click on Actions, then Create Method, then I'll choose Post, then click on the check mark. I'll keep the Lambda function, then check the Lambda proxy integration. Then for the Lambda function name, I'll start to type upsert, then choose upsert question. Now give it a quick look to confirm all is correct, then click on save. And again, we get the permission dialog box, and yes, we want to give permission for the API to invoke the upsert question Lambda, so I will click on OK. Then let's quickly do the same for the put method. I'll go to Actions, then Create Method. Then from the pull-down menu, I'll choose Put. Then the check mark. From this window, keep Lambda, check proxy integration, keep the region, and the Lambda function, type upsert question, then save, then OK. So now we have the questions resource and 3 methods that call Lambda functions. Next, we want to add a sub-resource under the questions resource. So make sure that questions is selected, then go to Actions, and choose Create Resource. Keep both checkboxes unchecked, and in the resource name field, type ID surrounded by braces or squiggly brackets. And in the resource path, change the dashes to also squiggly brackets. Then click on Create Resource. So for this resource, we will create 3 new methods. So we can call the getSingleRecord Lambda, and the deleteRecord Lambda, and the upsert question Lambda. Now the get method will be for the getSingleRecord, and the delete method will be for the deleteRecord, and the put method will be for the upsert question. The difference between this resource and the questions resource is that we are passing the ID as part of the API call. Alright, so let me add these 3 methods quickly since you've seen them before. Just make sure that you have ID as the currently selected resource. Then I'll go to Actions, then Create Method, then Get, then check mark, then keep everything as is, but just check the integration box and add the name of our Lambda, which for the get method we said will be getSingleRecord. Then save, then OK. Okay, this looks good so far, and now let's add the delete method. So I go to Actions, Create Method, I'll choose Delete, then check mark, then proxy, and for the Lambda function, I'll type delete record, then save, then OK. Then I'll go to Actions again, then Create Method, then this time it's the put method, then check mark, then check proxy integration, and in the Lambda field, I type upsert question, then save, then OK again. Alright, so that's what we have so far. We have a root resource called questions with 3 methods, then a sub-resource called ID with these 3 methods. And now I need to create a second sub-resource under questions called find1. So make sure questions is selected, then go to Actions, then create resource, leave both boxes unchecked, and in the resource name, I'll type find1. But make sure that the O is capital. And then in the path field, change the small o to a capital O. And again, this is important. Make sure you change this manually. And now let's add a get method to this new resource. So first, make sure it's selected, then go to Actions, then create new method, then get, then check mark, then proxy integration, then find one question, then save, then OK. So this is what you should have by now. Our root resource is called questions, and it has these 3 methods. And it has a sub-resource called find1 with 1 method, and another sub-resource called ID with 3 methods. Now, we need to do exactly the same steps, but for the answers resource, with the exception that we don't need a find1 sub-resource for answers. So in the end, we will have the same exact thing as we do see here, but for answers, minus this find one sub-resource. All right, I'll click on the root resource at the very top, then go to Actions, then Create Resource. In the resource name, I'll type Answers with a capital A. Then please make sure you change in the resource path to make Answers with a capital A as well. Then leave the two checkboxes unchecked. Then click on Create Resource. Then let's create our get method. And proxy integration as usual. And for Lambda function name, we type table scan. Then save, then OK. Then let's create the post method. Then the usual. And for Lambda name, we type upsert answer. Then save, then OK. Then let's create the put method. Then the proxy integration. And for Lambda name, we type upsert answer again. Then save, then OK. And now we need to create the sub-resource of ID under answers. So make sure answers is selected, then create resource. Then for resource name, it's ID, but in braces. Then for the path, update the value so it's also using braces, just like the name. And leave both boxes unchecked. Then click on Create Resource. Now let's create the get, delete, and put methods. So I'll go to Actions, then Create Method, then Get, then Checkmark, then Proxy Integration as usual. Then I'll type Get Single Record, then save, then OK. And back to Actions again, Create Method, this time it's delete, then Checkmark, then the usual. And for function name, I type delete record, then save, and OK. And last but not least, we create the put method. Checkmark, the usual, and for function name, we type upsert answer. And then save, and OK. All right, so let me collapse all this. And now we see that we have two main resources, answers and questions. If I expand answers, I see we have get, post, and put methods. Then I see a sub-resource called ID, and that has delete, get, and put methods. Then if I expand the questions resource, I see the methods get, post, put, then a sub-resource called find1 with one get method, then another sub-resource called ID with delete, get, and put methods. All right, now the next thing that we have to contend with is adding support for something called CORS, which is an acronym for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing, CORS. This is a mechanism to use HTTP headers to allow resource sharing across different domains. Well, why do we need this here? Well, our S3 bucket has a different domain than our API URL. And so we're going from one domain to another when using our Angular application. And while that is normal, we just need to include support for such cross-domain communication. And to do that, we have to add a new method called options to all our resources and configure it with specific headers. So let's add CORS to the first resource, and it's very similar to adding a get or post or delete method. I'll click on the questions resource, then actions, then create method, then Options. Then I'll click on the check mark. From this page, I'll choose Mock, which allows us to return a response with specific API mappings. And there's no other data here to configure, so I'll just click on Save. I'll click on Method Response. Then under HTTP status, I'll click on the arrow to the left of the HTTP status to open the 200 status details. Here, I need to add a few response headers for the 200 status. So if I go back to the assignment guide, these are the response headers that I need to add. And there's 5 of them. I'll go back to my API page, then click on Add Header, and I'll just copy and paste the headers one by one so I don't make a mistake. Then I'll click on check mark to save it. And I'll do the same for the other 4 headers. Okay, so now that these are created, I need to give them values. So I'll go back to my previous page and click on Integration Response. Then I'll expand the 200 response status, then expand the header mappings. Here I see my response headers that I just created moments ago. And to the far right, I see the pencil icon so I can modify these values. The allow credentials need a value of true, and make sure it's surrounded with single quotes. Mine appears here automatically because I'm using Chrome and I've done this exercise before, so my values are saved in my browser for now. For you though, you'll have to type them in manually. And once you enter the correct value, you will need to click the check mark on the far right to save this change. For my next header, which is the allow headers, make sure you copy the long value from the assignment guide. But again, I have it already from before, so I'll just click it, then save it by clicking on the check mark on the far right. Then for allow methods, it's Option star, then save it, and again, please remember the single quotes. Then for the allow origin, the value is just a star, then save it. Then for X requested with, it's also a star, then save it. So that was one resource where we added the options method to, and now I need to do the same for my other API resources. So that would be answers, ID, and find one, and ID again. Since these actions are all the same for all of them, I'll just do them in silence and you can watch me. All right, so now I have the options method added to all my resources with the same response headers as I've shown you in the first resource. Okay, since everything now is set up, I now need to finally deploy this API. I'll click on the Actions button, then Deploy API. From this window, I'll choose New Stage, then I'll give it the name API, then I'll click on Deploy. This will not give me my API URL, but when I click on it, it gives me this error. This is expected. The reason is because I need to append my resource to the end of the URL. For example, I'll add /questions, and there is my list of questions. This is a good sign that the API, Lambda, and DynamoDB are working fine together. I can also change the questions to answers. And here are my answers as well. Just make sure that you type the word questions or answers with the first letter being capitalized. Again, they are case sensitive. Okay, so now I'm done with my API side of things. And now I need to update my Angular application by making some code changes in two specific files, the main.ts file and the environment.prod.ts file. And this is available in our assignment guide. But the point is that we need to update the code in the main.ts file by adding the line loopbackconfig.filter on URL. And this needs to be added to the end of the main.ts file. And you can get that line of code from our assignment guide. So I will open my Laughs Web project, which contains this file in my VS Code. And I navigate to the source folder or the SRC folder. And here's my main.ts file. So I'll copy the code change from the assignment guide. Then I'll make the change. And of course, please don't forget to save your changes. Then I need to open the environment.prod.ts file, which is also under source, then environments. And here I need to update the API URL value to be the API URL that I just deployed from the API moments ago. So I'll go to the AWS API gateway. I'll copy the API URL, then paste it into the environment.prod.ts file. But don't include the /API at the end. Then make sure that you save your changes as well here. I can now close my VS Code, and I will open Terminal so I could rebuild my Angular application so it's ready for deployment into my S3 bucket with the latest code changes that I just made. The command that I need to run in Terminal is found in the Week 3 assignment guide. So I'll open the Week 3 assignment guide. And here's the command that I need to copy so I can build my Angular application again with the changes that I just made. And in Terminal, I need to cd to the Laughs Web folder. And once I'm there, I will paste the command. I'll modify it to make it look correct. Then I will run it. What this will do is create a new folder called dist under the Laughs Web folder. Well, since we ran this command back in week 3, the dist folder already exists, but now it will be updated because we just made a code change and rebuild the application. Okay, now that this is done, I can go back to the Laughs Web folder, and here's my dist folder. And under it is the folder that contains the files and folder that we need to upload to the S3 bucket. So let's go and do that now. I'll open another page in the AWS console for S3. Here I have a few buckets, and the one I will use is the NDSNHU3 bucket. So I'll click on it. Here we can see my existing files, which I need to overwrite. So I will upload the newly deployed files by clicking on Upload, then Add Files, then navigate to where the files are located, and I'll highlight the files, then click Open. Then I'll click on Add Folder. Then I'll choose the Assets folder. Then I'll click on Upload to confirm. Then Upload again. And things are looking good. So I will close this. Now, the moment of truth. To test all that we did, I will launch my website by going to the Properties tab. Then scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on this link. The Angular web application opens up. I'll click on Angular. And if all is well so far, then this is what I should get: a list of my questions. These questions should be the same as the ones that are in my DynamoDB table. And from here, I can like or dislike a question. I can also delete a question, then confirm the deletion, and now it's gone. I can also create a new question by clicking on the New Question button. I'll type any question, then click on the Ask Question button. I see a new question space has appeared, but my question text is not visible. And that's okay for now. Just click on Categories to exit this page. Then click on Angular again. And here's our question. I can also click on a question link, then type an answer for it by clicking on the New Answer button. Then I'll type an answer, then clicking the Answer button. And the same thing happens again. Just navigate away from this page, then back, and you can now see the answer count has incremented by 1. And if I click on the question link, I now see my answer. And to confirm the answer edit functionality, I'll click on the pencil icon, then edit my answer as I like, then click on the edit button, and now I see my answer has indeed been updated. So I can pretty much see that my API gateway is working with my Lambda function and talking to my DynamoDB, all using the front-end Angular web application. Now, if you do all the steps in this video and follow the assignment guide correctly, but when you come to load your Angular web application, you don't see your questions, there could be two main issues that's causing this problem. Actually, there could be many reasons, but the ones that I've seen the most from my students are as follows. The first issue stems from the week 5 assignment 2. Remember I asked you to comment out the course code from the upsert answer Lambda function? This might have fixed the week 5 assignment 2, but it now breaks this project 1. So now I'm asking you to please go back to the upsert answer Lambda function and uncomment these 2 lines back in your upsert answer Lambda code. The other probable issue that might be causing the Angular web application to not show questions is that you didn't edit your API URL correctly in the environment.prod.ts file. So please double check the file, and of course, make sure the file has been saved with these latest changes and that the entire application has been rebuilt with these new changes and that you did upload the changed application to your S3 bucket. So I know this was a lengthy project with many parts, but I hope this video was helpful for you to complete this assignment. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out via email or the general questions discussion forum. Thanks for watching.